Good greetings to you all. Very good to be with you. The title of this lecture is Democracy and its Opposite. And I'd just like to begin by telling you about an email I got yesterday. I came back from the book launch and there was an email from someone who had seen my article in The Australian. And in the email, the person said, where is our democratic state that the majority elected? Just snippets, give you a feel for what's in this email. Democracy seems to have lost a great deal of the benefits we associated with the free and, open quotes, democratic, close quotes, voting system. He concludes by saying, we seem to be lacking a Socrates to pose the right questions, let alone a statesman or woman to provide the answers. So I got that last night and I thought, okay, very interesting. And then this morning I was taking a meeting of a room full of Australians and I said, we live in a democracy. And I looked around the room and a lot of people were going like this. They were shaking their heads. So this is just the immediate background to what I want to talk about, democracy and its opposite. Now, this man who sent me this email said, we seem to be lacking a Socrates to pose the right questions, let alone statesman, stateswoman to provide the answers. And I'm sure he knows that Socrates was actually put to death by the democracy in Athens in 399 BC. I just think that's very significant. I'll stop for a few seconds to allow it to sink in. So for him, the man who's going to rescue the democracy, arrive on the scene, pose all the right questions, did exactly the same thing in 399 BC and for most of his life beforehand, and then they put him to death for that. That's what happened. The story went on, though, for a significant number of years prior to his execution in 399 BC. Plato was an associate of Socrates. You would really say a disciple of Socrates. When Socrates died and was put to death at the age of 70, Plato was 28 and probably had been with Socrates, it could be 10 years, could be longer. He was the most important influence on his life. The death of Socrates devastated Plato. It was the significant turning point in his life and made him reconsider every aspect of the future which had been mapped out for him as a high-born Athenian, where he could make his way in the politics of the time, because as in societies of that nature, if you're born at the right stratum, politics is just open to you, and that was open to Plato. But that all changed when the death of Socrates took place, when Socrates was executed under such cruel and contrived circumstances. And he turned then to philosophy, not with a view to turning his back upon society, and not with a view to going to the purely contemplative life. No, Plato saw Socrates as a means of benefiting his society. Plato saw philosophy as a means of benefiting his society and the only means of benefiting his society. The way to save a society was not politics, but philosophy. Now, you'd probably all agree with me on the not politics part. What is the alternative? Is politics going to save us? One person shook their head. Is philosophy going to save us? 3 people said yes. It's an important question. Just go back to the email that I was sent and all these questions about democracy and this general satisfaction about what's going on in your own country here at the moment. It would be the same in Ireland. It would be the same in any of these countries that I'm familiar with. I'm also going to talk about South Africa later, and you detect exactly the same thing in South Africa. I'll be talking about South Africa. Now, Plato turned to philosophy, and when he turned to philosophy, he did not turn his back on politics. the very democracy which had executed his master Socrates always was to the forefront of his mind. Many authors say he hated democracy, that he hated democracy because of what it did to Socrates. But when Plato comes to write his laws towards the very end of his life, he gives us a very beautiful, very simple framework in which to consider democracy, and I entitled the lecture Democracy and its Opposite. So there's something else besides democracy. But what he writes in the laws towards the very end of his life is, it would be right to say that there are, as it were, two mother forms of political systems from which all others arise. One is called monarchy, the other democracy. Now, a city must necessarily have a share in both of these if it is to have freedom and friendship accompanied by wisdom. A city could never be properly governed without a share of these two, the two being monarchy and democracy. The word democracy literally in Greek means ruled by the people. The people are the demos. And monarchy is ruled by one. Monon is the Greek for one. So two mother forms ruled by one, a single king who is all powerful. Ruled by the demos, the people somehow or other contrive a system whereby they run things. But they're the two mother forms, and you need both. And no city will have freedom and friendship accompanied by wisdom unless it has a share of these two, namely monarchy and democracy. Now, he immediately goes on from his own time to give an account of how this works in practice and how this is really, really important and what goes wrong when you don't have it. And he's going to focus first upon monarchy, because the Athenians at that time thought they lived in democracy. I know some people in this room question whether they live in a democracy or not. I found that out this morning, but he would not have had to say much about democracy to the Athenians, but he wants to talk about monarchy. And he goes back to the reign of a Persian king called Cyrus. Now, Cyrus reigned long before Plato, 559 to 530 BC. So getting on for 200 years before Plato's time was this king called Cyrus. And what Plato says in the laws, following on from what I've just read you, what he says in the laws about Cyrus, the all-powerful king, Cyrus, all-powerful king of Persia, no democracy. There's no democracy. What's more, if anyone among the citizens was wise and capable of offering his advice, the king Cyrus did not begrudge him that opportunity. He allowed free speech and respected those who could assist him in his deliberations. And so the benefit of another man's wisdom was made available to the community at its very heart. In fact, everything prospered for them in those days because of this freedom, friendship, and communal spirit. So there's Cyrus, a monarch, there's no democracy, but he listens. And because he listens, if there's any wisdom available in the community, it's made available to him. So he grants the demos, the people, a voice, and he listens to the people. And that is very, very good for Persia. As he says, there's a spirit of freedom, friendship, and communal spirit. It's fostered by the approach of Cyrus. So this is a very fortunate period for the Persian Empire. Cyrus is universally regarded and admired as a good ruler. He ruled for 29 years, 29 years, and he died leaving two sons. The two sons were designated as joint rulers. One of the sons immediately decided, well, that's not going to happen. So he killed the other one. Yeah, it's true. Plato then, in the same book of the Laws, Book 3, he describes this other son. He describes the two sons and their education. So these are the successors to Cyrus, let's call it golden age, bit of an exaggeration of Cyrus, but here's what succeeds. From their very childhood, they were reared as though they were already favoured with the blessings of heaven, with no deficiency. Their tutors would allow no one to oppose the children in anything because they were so blessed. And they made everyone else praise whatever the children said or did. So they brought them up to be people of a particular sort. So they're totally ill-educated. They're just spoilt, entirely used to having their own way and never, ever being accustomed to being opposed. Everyone just has agreed with them all their lives. Suddenly they're ruling, and the process which Cyrus was open to, listen to people, let the wisdom of the community flow into you to help you with your decision making, that would not enter the consciousness of this one surviving brother, son who'd killed his other brother. So suddenly Persia, from a very benign regime under Cyrus, goes into a dark period. So with the monarch, it's the luck of the draw. You get a good ruler, excellent. If he neglects the education of his children, and there's a failing on Cyrus, he didn't educate his sons for rule. And because of that, they just came into power just expecting everyone to say yes to them, and probably were utterly uncomprehending if anyone said anything else. So that was not good for Persia, and they went into a dark period after that. Now, what's missing here is obviously some sort of a system whereby what Cyrus did is, as you might put it, a legal or constitutional requirement, that you listen to the people. That brings in the democratic element. The people begin to have a voice. Cyrus gave it to them voluntarily. He was happy to listen. He didn't feel he was omniscient, and he was happy to listen to other people, and he availed of their wisdom. But it was not enforced by law, so when the other son came in and chose not to listen, there was nothing to make him create a popular assembly or any other mechanism whereby he could pick up wisdom from some source other than from himself. So the first thing that Plato says in the Laws, as he moves to consider this deficiency, because we've got a problem here, it can't just be the luck of the draw. We need some system whereby we can ensure that what we encountered by chance with Cyrus is the way things are meant to be, and you can't depart from them. So he says in the Laws, we have said that the lawgiver should frame laws with three aims in view: that the city under his laws will be free, friendly towards itself, and possessed of reason. These were the aims, were they not? So that's the aim. The aim of any laws is that the society should be free, wise, and friendly towards itself. Be free, friendly towards itself, and possessed of reason is the words that are here. Free, friendly towards itself, and possessed of reason. That's the general aim of the laws. It's very, very broad brushstrokes, but what exactly would they set up? The next statement is also in Plato's Laws. This time it's Book 4, and it's a term which is still familiar in constitutional law today. It's the term the rule of law. And it does not mean the rule of law on the streets. It means, as it's put here, when law is subservient and devoid of authority, I see destruction close at hand for such a city. But when law is the master of those in authority, and the rulers are subservient to the law, then I behold salvation and everything good that the gods ever bestow upon cities. So no one is above the law. Even the rulers are under the law. and they are actually servants of the law. They're meant to ensure that the laws are implemented and propagated so that the result of the law is attained and the society is free, wise, and friend to itself. So this is what was missing under the Persian arrangement. There was no such law in place. Whoever was the monarch was supreme. Law was beneath the monarch. In fact, whatever the monarch said, that was law. The idea that the monarch would be under anything was not acceptable. It was not required. I just need to make that clear. It was not required. So Cyrus just saw there's a higher law which says you should listen to people. There's a higher law which says someone might know more than you do. There's a higher law which says someone else might be wiser than you are. Somehow or other he intuited that and he heeded that, but it was not written down anywhere and it was not a requirement. So his son just neglected it and thought he knew best because that's the way he'd been brought up anyway. So this was not, this is the problem in Persia is just that. There is no law to make any of this happen. Now, I'm going to go on and I'm going to talk about Russia, and then I'm going to go on and I'm going to talk about South Africa. And then I'm going to bring the lecture to a conclusion by bringing this back to the age in which we live, in which I get emails expressing dissatisfaction, and I get people nodding their heads this morning when I say we're living in a democracy. So I'm back to the question at the very end, what will remedy our ills now? I'll now do Russia, which is very, very interesting. I've been very interested in Russia. I've been reading about the Russian Revolution. I've been reading Dostoevsky for several years. And there's a recent book published by a woman called Susanna Rabo Edling, and it's called The First Russian Revolution. So this is actually an anniversary. Today, this very month, is an anniversary. Not when we need to celebrate, but it's an anniversary. It's the 200th anniversary of the December Revolution in Russia of 1825, this very month. And even though the calendar's chopped and changed a bit, it was December. So exactly December, 200 years ago, was the first Russian Revolution, what Susanna Rabo Edling calls the first Russian Revolution. And I've been reading her book, and it's a very, very interesting book and very, very well written. And what happened there was, goes back to a strange sequence of events. Napoleon invaded Russia in 1812. The 1812 Overture doesn't celebrate the invasion, it celebrates his expulsion. He got to Moscow. You probably know the rest of the story, but in very simple terms, he was defeated by the Russians. The Russians chased him out, and they chased him out as far as Paris. They got right as far as Paris. In 1814, the Russian Tsar, the Russian Emperor, was in Paris, the victor over Napoleon, the only nation that was able to defeat Napoleon and bring him down. And the officers were there, and they were in a totally different world. They could not believe what they were seeing around them, and in particular, the freedoms. And when they came back to their own country, Russia, they thought, oh my heavens, what a contrast. And here's a little quotation from Susanna Rabo Edling's book. She talks about one man. Yakushin wrote that his stay abroad during the military campaigns first drew my attention to Russia's social structure and compelled me to see its defects. The young officers could now compare all that they had seen abroad with what confronted them at home. Slavery of the majority of Russians, cruel treatment of subordinates by their superiors, all kinds of government abuses and general tyranny. The army, from generals to privates, upon its return, did nothing but discuss how good it is in foreign lands. Betsushev recalls, a comparison with their own country naturally brought up the question, why is it not so here? Did we liberate Europe in order to fasten its chains upon ourselves? The Decembrists later recalled the anger they felt when the peasants who had been fighting against Napoleon returned to Russia and were once again forced into serfdom. After fighting alongside regular soldiers, the officers felt strongly for these unfortunate people. And Russia at that time had serfdom. The serfs were not liberated until 1861, many years after this. And when the serfs were liberated in Russia, the population of Russia was about 60 million. 20 million were serfs. That really means slaves. You belonged to people, and your wealth was measured on how many serfs you owned. You could quote, "I own 1,000 serfs." So that was the position of Russia. They came back and they began lobbying the Tsar for two things, which are very significant in terms of democracy and its opposite. You definitely have monarchy. The two mother forms are monarchy and democracy. You've got one man, the Tsar, and that's monarchy. You get all of the abuses that go with it. Here's the condition of Russia under monarchy. What they said to him was, please, can we have a democratic assembly of some sort with some power even to make recommendations to you, even if they can't enforce them. And also, and this was really a red rag to a bull, could we have a written constitution? Basically, reading between the lines, to which you will be subject. The Tsar will be subject. Remember what Plato said. Where law is subservient and devoid of authority, I see destruction close at hand for such a city. But when law is master of those in authority, they wanted a written constitution, laws that would be master of those in authority, namely the Tsar. What do you think his answer was? You get it. They wouldn't hear of it. They would not hear of it. Now, back to Kathy's question about divine. They were brought up, the upbringing was such that you are there appointed by God to rule Russia. It's the next step above the Tsar is God. It will never ever happen that the next step above the Tsar is a written constitution, and that the Tsar would be compelled to listen to any democratic assembly of any kind. So he just drew a line, even though he had condoned a written constitution for Poland and for France after they left France. And they were really hopeful when they saw that. He's done it for Poland. He's done it for France. He seems to have no problem there. Surely he will do it for us in Russia. So they kept lobbying, they formed secret societies. It was all an officer inner circle, mainly aristocrats and officers. Not a peasant, well, there's never going to be a peasant revolt. Eventually they waited, they did a lot of talking, they did a lot of planning. There was a bit of division between them. Some people said, no, we're just looking for constitutional reform. We're looking for what we would call a parliamentary democracy. Others were saying, no, there's only one way to do this. We've got to kill the Tsar. So that was the conflict between the revolutionaries. Eventually, that's 1814, they come back from Paris, they wait. I've told you the revolution's 1825, so that's 11 years later, and it was however many years after Napoleon invaded. And eventually in 1825, the Tsar dies. That's Tsar Alexander I. He died young, he was not yet 50. And there was also a dispute and confusion over who his successor was going to be, because he did have two sons, but one of them didn't want it. And the other son didn't know that the other guy didn't want it. So things got a bit confused, and they said, this is our golden opportunity. Absolutely golden opportunity. They really, in their heart of hearts, knew that they were simply going to die in a good cause. They're very noble people with very noble aspirations, and they knew their chances of success were slim. And sure enough, the revolution was suppressed within days. And the Tsars thereafter attempted to erase it from history so that people didn't know about it. But the later revolutionaries, and Lenin and Trotsky and the later people who brought about the successful revolution, they were quite aware of it. Although they did laugh at it as the sort of the popular revolution without the populace, which it was. It was an upper class revolution. So there again is an attempt to put in place a democracy alongside the monarchy and a system of laws to govern it all and make it all happen, and everything is under those laws. The training of the Tsars was such that right to the very end, they simply would not grant these concessions. And even when under the Nicholas II, the last of the Romanovs, he allowed them to form a Duma, a People's Assembly, but it was dissolvable at his will. All he had to do is say, it's gone, and it was gone. And there was no written constitution. There might have been a document, but again, that document could be set aside at the whim of the Tsar. So the idea in that really important quotation, when law is master of those in authority and the rulers are subservient to the law, I behold salvation and everything good that the gods ever bestow upon cities. So the Tsars resisted this to the very, very end. And even in 1917, early 1917, the Tsar's ultimate solution to the chaos that was unfolding around him was to abdicate. So 1917, early 1917, the Tsar abdicates. There's then a provisional government and, a lot of chaos and a lot of confusion in Russia. But this balance was playing out for hundreds of years in Russia, with people just pointing to Plato's principle, monarchy plus democracy and all under law. And it was resisted. Now, South Africa, a very recent example, and a modern constitution, the South African Constitution. And I'm going to talk about a woman called Thuli Madonsela, who was appointed by Jacob Zuma as public protector. And in her role as public protector, under Article 9, Chapter 9 of the Constitution of the Republic of South Africa, she has the power, as regulated by national legislation, to investigate any conduct in state affairs or in the public administration of any sphere of government that is alleged or suspected to be improper or the result of any impropriety or prejudice. So she is appointed to this role. She's appointed to the role by Jacob Zuma, and the way these things work, I appoint you to the role. You need to remember who gave you that job. But she didn't. There was a great scandal unfolding in South Africa at the time of the amount of money that Zuma had spent upon his private residence, cum fortress, cum palace. And it was definitely an abuse. And she investigated this abuse by Zuma. She finished her report, which was negative towards Zuma, and found that he had been guilty of improper conduct. She finished that report in 2013. She was put under huge pressure to, burn it, lose it. Don't make trouble. This is not going to go anywhere. So she waited a year and she published it. And it's such strength. She has the law in place, the written constitution of South Africa. She's operating under that. She has got a democratic mandate, and she's the public protector. She's protecting the democracy, the demos. She's protecting the people. That's her job. Zuma is on the other side, the monarch, and monarchs will always try it. It's just in their nature. They'll always try why don't you just go away? Why don't you remember who gave you this job? Why don't you just burn that report? Because you're only going to make trouble for everyone, even more so for yourself. This is the play that's going on. she still makes no headway, even though she's published the report. Not much is happening. In what time is that? She was listed as Time Magazine's Time Magazine's list of the world's most 100 influential people, and I haven't written down the year, around this time, 2013, 14, 15, probably more 14, 15, because she didn't publish the report until 2014. So having failed to get anywhere with the report in circulation, because all Zuma's going to say is it's not true, it's not true, it's not true, I didn't do anything, I'm not corrupt, she then takes a court case. And she wins the court case. And they find Zuma has operated improperly. He's the president of South Africa. And they find in favour of Thuli Madonsela, there's a photograph of her there. And I mean, doesn't look that formidable. But my God, Zuma didn't know what he was taking on. I have a quotation from the judgment of Chief Justice Magoeng, who was also a Zuma appointee and was supposed to toe the line and remember who gave him this job. You're Chief Justice, big job, congratulations, remember who gave it to you. Didn't work. They sided with law. Quotation from the judgment. One of the crucial elements of our constitutional vision is to make a decisive break from the unchecked abuse of state power and resources that was virtually institutionalized during the apartheid era. To achieve this goal, we adopted accountability, the rule of law, Plato's Laws, Book 4, the rule of law, and the supremacy of the Constitution as values of our constitutional democracy. For this reason, public office bearers ignore their constitutional obligations at their peril. This is so because constitutionalism, accountability, and the rule of law constitute the sharp and mighty sword that stands ready to chop the ugly head of impunity off its stiffened neck. You get the message, Mr. Zuma? That was 2016, the date of the judgment, 2016. He stepped down in 2018. And his own party, the ANC, turned against him. So there it is. It's an extraordinary story. And it's the same forces playing out. Now we've got the three elements in place, but it's quite a battle. It's quite a battle. You don't just put a constitution in place and suddenly you're in the promised land. It took Thuli Madonsela and her courage and her doggedness and Justice Magoeng to realise I'm the Chief Justice. I'm not a right-hand man of Jacob Zuma. He stood by justice. She stood by her fidelity to her role as public protector. And because of that, Zuma was brought down. You can dramatically say, some people would challenge it, but she's the woman who brought down Jacob Zuma. And she just was relentless. She was not going to let go. So there it is. That's the Russian example of how all of this plays out, and a more modern example of how all of this plays out. Both of them quite dramatic. Both very, very dramatic. And that drama in Russia, of course, went on from 1825 right through to the first, the 1905 revolution, which really was not very successful, ended in Bloody Sunday and the massacre, and then 1917, which just uttered in more chaos, unfortunately. But nevertheless, the Tsar was gone. So let me just stop there again. Now, I've given you some examples and I'm showing you how this works and how this actually plays out in practice. That's what Plato did in the Laws. He gave you the examples of Cyrus. They're slightly dated at this stage, and so I just thought I'd update them. So we've done Russia and we've done South Africa. Let me finish now. The day and age in which we live. And I have a formulation here. I gave it yesterday at the book launch. I've said it quite a lot recently, and I just think it's Plato's message to the world in which we live. I'm back to Plato. we've been reading his laws. You've got quotations from his laws there. But what I translated, it's on the cover of the book. And if you don't want to read the translations, I really don't care. But just have a quick look at the cover of the book. It's the dialogues of Plato. The dialogues of Plato. Not the teachings of Plato, the dialogues of Plato. Not the philosophy of Plato, it's the dialogues. And what screams out from every page of Plato is dialogue and discourse. Dialogue and discourse. And a further step of a remarkable achievement on Plato's part of being able to understand the views of people with whom he radically disagrees. Being able to understand the views of people who really threaten society and threaten the good order of society. So instead of just railing against them, the first step he takes is to understand them. And if you read the dialogues, you'll find you begin to be told where these people are coming from. These troublemakers, these problematic people, these people who want nothing to do with justice, the Jacob Zumas of this world, who really, as soon as you write a constitution, the question is, okay, how do we get around this? And you begin with even the idea of, appoint the right people. Tuli Madansela, young woman, she'll cause no trouble. Magoeng, known him for years, good guy, he'll know who appointed him. Wrong on both counts. They're the remarkable aspects of these dialogues. The rest is detail, and the detail's important. But dialogue and discourse and understand people, really understand people, even if you're appalled by them, even if you're appalled by their views, really understand people. Now, so what does this society do? I have a story told about Plato and Socrates, and the story is a later story. It's from Diogenes Laertius, long after Plato and Socrates was gone, but I'll paraphrase the story for you as follows. The story is that Socrates had a dream, and in this dream, a young swan, a cygnet, was given to him. The cygnet, because they're brown wings, immediately turned white, grew full plumage, and flew away, uttering a loud, sweet note. The next day, Plato was brought to Socrates as a pupil, and Socrates says, that's the swan whom I saw in my dream. So, Socrates' swan is Plato, and it flies away uttering a loud, sweet note. Now, I have several questions about this. I love the story. I have several questions about it. Why did the swan fly away? Why didn't it just stay there with the master, fluttering around, being a pet swan? Why did it fly away? What was the loud, sweet note? How far did the swan fly, and for how long? And is it flying still? So, this is the start of another lecture. So to cut it short, it can fly still. It can fly to this day. And if that swan flies to this day, the world will be much the better for it. And if people ignore the swan and want to bring the swan down, the world will be the worse for it. And the reason for that is that the swan, Plato, stands for dialogue and discourse in a world of people who don't want to talk to each other. And the swan has a loud, sweet sound. And dogma is not loud and sweet. Dogma is harsh. So it's the sound of, let me say, truth, as opposed to dogma. The sound that unites rather than divides. Now, you might think, what harm does dogma do? Sounds like just words. So I end very dramatically with a quotation which I've been carrying around with me for months. And I keep saying I won't use it. It's too dramatic. And just today, something said, use it. So here goes. Some of you may have seen a BBC series called The Ascent of Man, which aired in the 70s. I watched it and I loved it. The presenter was Jacob Bronowski. Bronowski was Polish, and he himself got out of Poland and out of that part of Europe as the Nazis came in. Many members of his family did not, and he lost many members of his family in the death camps. As part of that series, The Ascent of Man, he goes back to Auschwitz to make a point, and he says the following. It is said that science will dehumanize people and turn them into numbers. This is false, tragically false. Look for yourselves. Here is the cremation camp and concentration camp at Auschwitz. This is where people were turned into numbers. Into this pond were flushed the ashes of some 4 million people, and that was not done by gas. It was done by arrogance. It was done by dogma. It was done by ignorance. When people believe that they have absolute knowledge with no test in reality, this is how they behave. This is what men do when they aspire to the knowledge of gods. I owe it as a scientist to my friend Leo Szilard. I owe it as a human being to the many members of my family who died in Auschwitz. To stand here by the pond as a survivor and a witness. We have to cure ourselves of the itch for absolute knowledge and power. We have to close the distance between the push-button order and the human act. We have to touch people. So it's a powerful message. And Plato, standing against dogma, stands against what happened in those years. It was not done by gas. It was done by arrogance. It was done by dogma. It was done by ignorance. That's a harsh sound. And Plato's loud, sweet note stands against that to dissolve that harsh sound. And if somehow or other that sound can prevail in our society, things will be very, very different. Thank you very, very much. It's been wonderful to talk to you.